Well, I'm delighted to introduce our fourth session. This session is going to be more of an industry discussion from two very great winemakers in France. And France has, of course, incredible old vine heritage, but is perhaps not so much at the forefront of collective communication on old vine heritage compared to other, even European and certainly New World countries. However, there are many individual producers doing great work with old vines in France. And we've convened a panel that really combines, well, that reflects different scales of producers who are committed to old vines, both of them working with indigenous varieties, but actually at very different scales, although I would say that they certainly are kindred spirits when it comes to a concern for old vines. So our panel will comprise Katie Jones from Domaine Jones in the Languedoc and Olivier Bourdet-Pees, who is from Plaimont in Gascony. So Katie is the owner and winemaker at Domaine Jones. An English woman, she previously worked in wine sales before moving to France, drawn by the attraction of old vines in the Languedoc. She founded her winery in 2009 and has always championed the stories behind her parcels of ancient vines. Olivier Bourdet-Pees was born in Bern and grew up in a small cooperative farming family. It was his grandfather, a nurseryman and viticulturist, who passed on his passion for trees, genetic diversity, and wine to Olivier. He has worked extensively abroad, as well as in France. And since 2012, Olivier has been managing director of Plaimont, the great and much loved cooperative of Gascony. And he has really highlighted and emphasized the exceptional diversity of grape varieties from Gascony, as well as bringing together the members of his cooperative to highlight both old vines and heritage varieties. So I'm going to start off by asking Katie to talk about her work with old vineyards, the varieties, and her approach to the wines. And I've then got a couple of questions for you, Katie. And then I will ask Olivier to do the same. And then we will come together for more of a group discussion. So, Katie, would you like to tell us about your work at Domaine Jones?
I would. Thank you very much, Sarah. And bonjour to Olivier as well. I'm very honoured to be doing this with you because I do still feel very small in this very big movement, and the movement that's really breaking new ground and is very, very exciting. But to put it into context, I just own 14 hectares of very, very old vines here in the Languedoc. So it's tiny, but let me just perhaps share with you a quick presentation for people who don't know me and don't know where I am. So just go into here. Just bear with me for one moment. Here we go. So hopefully now I have the presentation up on the screen. It's literally just 4 slides, but really, so I'm based right down in the Languedoc in a very traditional area for growing vines and very much dominated by cooperatives as well. So just for those who don't know where I am, and probably you've never heard of the village of Touchon, which is where I've lived for the past 30 years. So the first 15 years of my life in Touchon, I was working for the big Montoche cooperative. And further to that, in 2009, I left and I set up my small Domaine Jones. But you see here, we're based between Perpignan and Narbonne and Carcassonne if you draw a triangle between those towns, Touchon is in the middle of that, and it's in the Aude department. And this just gives you an idea, my little map of my vineyards. So when I started, I basically started with one old vine vineyard, and of 2.5 hectares, so a pretty big one. From there, that was in 2009. And between then and now, I've literally cherry-picked some of the best sites for old vines in and around the village of Touchon. And you can see here, they're all traditional. They date back. The oldest ones are 116 years old, and the youngest ones are 50 years old. But you can see on the right-hand side of the map just that they're truly scattered around, but also the traditional grape varieties. So I specialise in Carignan, Grenache, and Syrah, which Syrah I consider as a more modern grape variety. And on the whites, I have wonderful things like Macabeu, Carignan Gris, Grenache Gris, Muscat, Old Muscat as well. So that literally just gives you an idea of the setup of my domain. It's not just vineyards all in the same place. They're really scattered around, and they're vineyards that I've bought up from people who used to be in the cooperative and that I've converted over to organic farming. So that's just a typical picture of one of my very old 116-year-old Carignan vines here in the village of Touchon. But what I have done, as Sarah mentioned, I do come from a sales and marketing background, and I think this is where my strength really comes in for the old vine movement, because I just love communicating everything that I do to my consumers and to my customers. So I set up in 21, I believe it was, an Adopt an Old Vine project. And amazingly, it really took off. My main aim was just to communicate as much as I could in very simple terms to my consumers so that they understand what is important about old vines and why old vines are in danger, mostly, and why they can make better wines as well. So it started off as a small project. Now I have around about 300 members in my club, and it's about to get bigger because I'm going to take it to a new dimension and actually renaming it the Old Vine Rescue project, which I feel is more adapted nowadays, especially in France, to actually rescuing these old vines. There is a sense of urgency in the old vines. And Sarah, I've just got a little message for you as well, because you are a vine parent. You did adopt, and Gaëtan still talks about you every day. So Gaëtan just really wants to send you a quick message just to say that he's a bit thirsty, but he is doing really well. He's a 116-year-old Carignan in my vines. And Belinda, I know you're behind the scenes, but Leia as well is a Grenache Gris that's been adopted by Leia, and she sends her love too. She says she struggled a bit this year, but they're hoping to bounce back next year.
Gaëtan's looking pretty nimble, actually, kind of, you know, muscular even.
Fit.
Fit.
Yeah. Yeah, I think he is looking really rather fit, trim, and pretty, you know, that for 116 years old, he's looking pretty good, I think. But this is the way that I can inform my customers of climate change and the challenges that there are through this, what may seem like a very light-hearted approach to the vines, but it's actually a way of getting the messages across and just explaining the problems that we are encountering. And this is the last slide on my presentation, but for me, in Touchon, I would say the main problem we have at the moment with climate change is the dramatic drop in rainfall. You can see on this graph, just take the last couple of years, 20 to 24, just the decline in the amount of rainfall that we're getting. So it's getting drier and drier. To give you an idea, a neighbouring village, Durban, Les Corbières, now has to ship in water to the village to be able to have water for the people living in the village. So Toucham, we have underground springs from the Toche mountain, which help us. But again, this summer, we also had a couple of days where the springs dried up. It's very Jean de Florette down here. And the springs dried up and we had to ship in water for a couple of days. So for me, that is the prime concern for the region at the moment in climate, with the change in the climate at the moment.
Thank you, Katie. Just prior to this session earlier today, we were speaking with Louisa Rose of Yalumba, and she made the point that wine will have to justify and win support for agricultural resources in the context of all the other pressures on those resources. Do you think that in your region there will be an acceptance of emergency irrigation for vines, or is water becoming such an issue that it will get to the point of like we have in Napa, for example, of really quite a heated competition?
Yeah. Yeah, I do see it as heated competition, but I don't see how in my particular valley in the region, I don't know how we're going to be able to cope with it. And I feel lucky to have old vines who seem to cope better with the lack of water anyway. But there is now a lack of underground water. So to irrigate, we don't have any rivers. We have less underground water as well. So there are plans, I heard, big plans. So we're talking big projects, but to extend the pipeline of rainwater, which at the moment is pumped to Béziers, so not too far away, to extend that to the Aude department and through to Languedoc, to the Roussillon, Perpignan, which is it's just like it's becoming desertic, if that's a word. But that's obviously a long-term solution to it. But at the moment, it's going to be difficult, and the government has just opened up an envelope of 120 million euros to rip up vines, to give subsidies to growers if they want to rip up vines. And those 120 million euros, they have said they want to keep vines that can be irrigated, and that they're looking at grubbing up, not as a priority, but dry farmed, low yielding vines.
Right.
I think that's really scary.
Right. Olivier, what's your reaction to that? You're on mute.
Yeah, very impressed. It's incredible to see the convictions of people as Katie does an incredible job in this region. Our story is a bit the same. We are talking about adaptation. The conditions are completely different. So it's amazing to understand the situation. It's not so far from Plaimont, to be honest, but we see how people are looking their strengths, their difficulties, and try to adapt to express the best of their terroir, trying to find strong solutions. No technology, no strong solutions in adaptations to be in the right moment, in the right way of thinking their willings. And this is very model for us and very impressive. So congrats, Katie. I didn't really know. I knew a little bit about the co-op of Montoche years ago. But yeah, it's Fitou and all the region is something
Yeah,
incredible.
it is a bit of a disaster zone at the moment, and you can feel the tension in the village. Having lived in Touchon for 30 years, and we've had ups and downs, but you can feel that tension rising because last year our harvest is down this year, generally in the Eau department of 50%. So we are 50% down. And whereas as a private producer, I'm actually 70% down, but as a private producer, I can react and cope. On a cooperative scale, it's really scary. It's really difficult.
And Olivier, could I ask you, actually, Olivier, would you like to tell us a bit more about the project at Plaimont? Because actually, I think there are some really interesting questions, but perhaps if you could give us your context and then we can have the questions and discussions, because I've been fortunate to come to Plaimont, so I know about your project, but I know sadly, not everyone has had that pleasure yet. So would you like to tell us more about your work at Plaimont?
Yeah, for sure.
Yeah. Okay.
Maybe I can show you some images of us. I don't know. Do you have it?
If you click on share, which is the green box with the arrow,
you
should be able then to share your.
Do you have this? Sorry, I am doing this. Yes, sorry. Partager that. It is that one. Okay.
And Olivier,
Okay for you?
If you click on diaporama, yes, perfect.
Perfect. Sorry.
No, thank you.
So just to tell you where we are, so the situation is not so far again, not so far from the Pyrenees as in Touchon, but the situation is completely different because we have the Atlantic Ocean and we are the most rainy zone in France. And if I can give you, Katie, a little bit of my water, it's.
Oh yes, please send it down, Olivier. Send it down.
Yeah, to tell you the zone, we are talking about a zone where we are receiving around 1,000 to this year 1,500 millimeters a year of water, which is huge. So the situation is completely different.
Yeah.
And for sure, the adaptation to these conditions is really, really different. You see there, maybe the foothills of the Pyrenees with the four main appellations we are managing, Jurançon, Madiran, and the white grape of the white appellation of the zone of Madiran, the name is Pacheringue de Vic-Bilh. Then the Saint-Mont appellation, all those three appellations are part of the foothills of the Pyrenees. And then there is the big zone of Gascony. And in Plaimont, we have 5,000 hectares of vineyard in all this zone, which is representing around 25% of the production of that zone. So quite a big project, a bit different, but the same willings of expressing what we are and coming back to our roots, our convictions to build the future of that region. So the explanation of the water we have is that the clouds are coming from the west, from the Atlantic Ocean in the western part. They are blocked by the Pyrenees. So they are giving water. Irouléguy, we don't see Irouléguy appellation in the Pays Basque, is more than 1,500 millimeters a year. Then you enter in the territory with Jurançon, it's 1,300, 400 millimeters a year. Madiran and Saint-Mont are 1,100 millimeters a year in general, in the average. And then you are coming to Auch, and Auch is 500 to 600 millimeters a year. You are losing half part of the water when you enter 50 kilometers more in the land. So this zone is really specific in the availability, in the freshness of the climate and the availability of water. To tell some figures about Plaimont, so very young co-op, We were born in the year 1978, which is really young. We were nearly dead at that point. All the wine growing philosophy was lost, was dead. We were producing the worst and the cheapest wine in France and maybe in the world. The worst, I think, we were. And we try to improve, to rebuild an ambition from that date, making people believing in the wine growing and in the winemaking, because a lot of the ambition of that territory was around distillation and the production of Armagnac years ago. And we came back to believe in wine, producing wine, and to having a big ambition for the local grapes, preserving the very old plots, and showing this to the world by making a project, a collective project, able to show that and to bring the bottles to our customers everywhere in the world. So the first exports started in the year 84. We created the most important ampelographic conservatory, private conservatory, ampelographic conservatory in the year 2002. We have now 39 different disappeared grapes coming from the zone. We were lucky enough to have an incredible plot. We were working for years, but it was recognized in the year 2011 as the first and still the unique vineyard recognized as an historical monument in the year 2011. And now, Plaimont is a bit more than 5,000 hectares of vineyard, 600 wine growers, and around 200 people working for Plaimont. So quite a very important project for a small region. Gascony is a small, Gers is a small department. So quite an important project. So the climate and the humidity, we talked a lot about it. We are really lucky with the quantity of water we have, but we have to manage it. It's not easy to have so much water. And for the last 2 years, it was huge. And this year, we have now more than 1,300 at that date. We had more than 250 millimeters during the harvest this year. It was incredibly difficult to manage. So we have to adapt ourselves to those conditions. The appellations I talked a little bit. We had to make big choices in the region with adaptation with the local grapes. So we are producing Colombard, Petit Courbu, Gros Mansingue, Petit Mansingue, Aruffiac, grapes that are really easy in those conditions of production, and they need a lot of water. Please, Katie, don't adopt Petit Mansingue. You need a lot of water during the year. But in these conditions, it is expressing the terroir, what we are, in a fresh, aromatic, strong, and the ability to age of that grape, Gros Mansingue, Petit Mansingue, are huge in bottles. So very, very impressive white wines, in my opinion. And then local grapes, Tannat, Cabernet Franc, Cabernet Sauvignon, and Pinot. But very, very important grapes for the zone. But they are still adapted, but they are increasing a bit the level of alcohol because of the hiring of temperature we have. We still have a lot of water in the region, but we have to say that we are hiring the temperature. We are the harvest is earlier and earlier, so we have to adapt to reintroduce disappeared grapes as the tardif. Tardif in French means late. You know what it means. It's a very, very late grape that it was disappeared because it was impossible in our region to have a complete ripeness 1 century or 2 centuries ago. But we are working a lot on that one to reintroduce it. The same one for Mansanois, which is a close brother to Tannat. But the Tannat with a perfect maturity is around 40 degrees in alcohol. The Mansanois is 11. So you understand, maybe it's part of our future. To tell you about what we are is the berceau a little bit of the wild vines in the southwest of France. We are lucky enough to have this, what we call that lambrusque in French. Lambrusque is a completely wild vine, and it is from those wild vines that the wine growers, years, centuries after centuries, selected the grapes we are using now in the territory. So we are preserving, we are making a wonderful job on the preservation of Lambrusque. They are in the forest in general. So we found 29 completely wild plants in the forest, which is very, very impressive thing to understand where we are coming from. And then the management of all the very, very old plots. I have already talked about the pre-phylloxeric vineyard we have as a historical monument planted in the year 1830. So it's 21 hours of vineyard, so a very small vineyard, but impressive with 20 different grapes. And this one is, if you have the opportunity to come and visit us, it's something very impressive, really. We have another plot planted in the year 1871. The first one, we don't know the exact date of plantation, but the second one, we know it. It was planted in 1871. It's a pure tannat plot, half an hectare. And another huge plot of La Madeleine planted in the year 1880 with tannat again. But the rootstock is an hybrid. It's Noah, the direct hybrids of Noah. And we have many, many other very old plots. On the 5,000 hectares of vineyard, we have more than 130 hectares that are more than 50 years old. So we have a big project around the preservation of those massal selections around those old plots. Yeah, here are some figures and some images of the historical monument, and you see each plant is different. Disappeared grapes, some of them are female, small evolution on those plates, so they don't have both flowers, male and female, on the same plant. And we are making a wonderful job to understand those grapes and to understand if they are useful for us in the future. So always preserving what we are and trying to understand if they can be part of our future and part of the future of the viticulture in our region. Yeah, that's why I wanted, and the knowledge now with the DNA analysis and the links between all those grapes are really something we are working on. Two people are working in Plaimont only in this job to understand the diversity of the grapes we have, to understand the possibility of those grapes to come back to vineyards or not. For example, we only refound one plant of Manzanois, only one. We replanted, we grafted 40 plants, then half an hectare. We have now 39 hectares of Manzanois. We are the only one to have these incredible grapes. And it was nearly disappeared, and it will be part of the future of the region of Gascony. Here we are, Sarah, the big things. I have too many things, to tell you, but in some small figures, what we are believing in is around this.
Thank you. I appreciate your passion. I was on mute, the eternal refrain. If you do go to Plaimont, you will probably find yourself hiking through a forest led by Olivier
For sure.
as you the wild vinifera. So something that really struck me in both of your presentations and the points that you made is I think there's a real paradox within France about the attitude to old vines. And it's a kind of oxymoron. Because on the one hand, you have the great French regard for culture, cultural heritage, agriculture as part of identity. And for example, you've succeeded in having your vineyard classified as a national monument. You know, it's not like it's Notre Dame, you know, it's incredible. On the other hand, we have the situation that Katie told us about, where essentially the regional regulations are are against really the preservation of old dry farmed vineyards, and are effectively encouraging their removal and their replacement with newer vineyards, probably more in the, I mean, the Languedoc is very different to Gascony in the sense that the Languedoc is really this hotbed of almost modernism, isn't it, within France, as well as being this seat of heritage. So I see this real paradox and kind of ambiguity in France on the approach to this aspect, to the heritage. Why do you agree? And assuming you do agree, you've been nodding. Why do you think that is? And what can we do to kind of bring, maybe elevate the importance of the old vine story for marketing and successfully selling this aspect of French wine?
If I can, something that springs into mind, which I think sums up for me, I'd say here there's almost a total disrespect for old vines. That's quite strong. But in the Languedoc, or in my area of the Languedoc, because there's lots of other areas, but the old vines are known as les galères. So the word les galères is basically a nightmare. So, and I actually do have a brand called Les Galères as well that I've done. But for me, that sort of sums it up. They're seen as really hard work, vines that are hard to work, that cost a lot of money, and that basically nobody wants. And I think sometimes I'm known as an old vineyard collector, and a bit like stray dogs, I sort of pick up the old vines. I have absolutely no problem in buying vineyards that are 120 years old here, because nobody wants them at all. They're the cheapest vineyards. Oh, perhaps I shouldn't say that, because but they are the cheapest vineyards. The price can go from anything between 4,000 to 5,000 a hectare for old vines. Basically the price that you would get, because people assume that you're going to rip them up and replant. So it's the price that would cost for replanting. But you can get up to 15,000 for younger vines that are higher producing. So just a couple of examples that sort of sum up the lack of respect for these poor elderly vines down here in the Languedoc.
Olivier, what's your perspective?
Yeah, you know, yeah, the problem is when I hear Katie, it's the same in the region, and so sometimes people do believe in production, productivity, and they are losing the way of adapting to the new conditions, to the climatic conditions, adapting to the willings, to their convictions, and to the willings of their customers and the people who they are working with. And they want to produce more and more and more, and this is the only way they believe they are able to live in a region. But each time they do believe in this, each time they have more problems, lack of water for Fitu, too much water for us when they produce a lot, and they are always in front of walls and walls and walls, and they are going to in front of the walls, and they say, okay, it's not possible to keep doing this job, because they are looking for the problems. They don't think about avoiding them by adaptation. They only believe in, I would say, in resolving the problems. We will see. This is my problem. I miss a little bit of quantity. Okay, I will produce with more quantities and more quantities. I stop with the old plots adapted, but I need more. So okay, I throw away this, and you fall in a worst problem. and another worse problem and worse problem. And you only believe in correction to resolve your problem. Adaptation is the only way. And the plots adapted for 1 century and 50 years to the different evolution of the conditions, at least you have to respect them. Sometimes you don't know why and you don't know always how, but you see they are still there and still producing qualities that are completely away from the general quality you find in the region. And furthermore, they have maybe inside solutions to the next problems. If you lose this ability to find a solution to the next problem by eliminating this because it is missing a little bit of production, or I don't know why, it's there, the plant is not right straight, it's a bit difficult to manage, you lose the possibility to have solutions to the next problems, and this is impossible. We don't want this for the next generations. Our child will put our memory in jail if we are not able to keep this solution for the future. We have to pay attention. This is a big responsibility. When you throw away an old plot, you throw away something that resisted to many things, and something who have in its biodiversity maybe the solution, and sometimes for a problem you don't even know for the moment. So
Yeah.
it's impossible to stop with an old plot. It's a crime, I would say.
Yeah.
Thank you. Katie, yesterday we heard from Dr. Jonathan Stein, who is a wine business and international wine marketing expert and academic, and he did some research for the South African Old Vine Project on perceptions and perceived value of old vine wine. And he had some really fascinating insights onto the kind of the potential premiumizing effect of old vine heritage when it's communicated in the right way. We then also had some conversations in the chat yesterday where two different views emerged about the potential of the old vine heritage to add value and to resonate with the market. And one view was that, this aspect of viticulture, it's too far back down the chain. It's not, immediate enough for consumers, and apart from very highly involved consumers, to really engage with. It's too complicated. And then we had another view, which was that, no, actually, this is incredibly evocative. The plants themselves are beautiful. The story is beautiful. They are living, sort of lignified stories. And it's an incredibly powerful and truthful way to engage. Katie, I would say that you have demonstrated that. And I think Plaimont have also demonstrated how it can sit within a much bigger portfolio that also addresses very big, commercial imperatives. Do you think there is potential and then hope for other regions in France to develop this? And what do you think it would take to actually, you to have more kindred spirits like yourselves actually telling more of this story, this aspect of French viticulture?
I think like in France there are people who promote old vines. There are some wonderful producers who are making wonderful wines from old vines. So there are people doing it. I think I can only talk about my area. This idea of vieille vigne, because I don't think consumers understand what that means exactly and why that can be beneficial. And I still get people saying to me, oh, but they're old vines, so why don't you rip them up? Or why do they make better wine? Basically, why do old vines make better wine? And consumers are not, the majority of them don't get that point. So I think there's a whole lot of communication, and I would go that it's not too complicated for consumers to understand, but it has to be presented in a way that they can understand it. And in the two examples you gave from the chat, I think they both came back to the same thing, that it's telling the stories and it's making it acceptable and easily understood by the consumer. But I think in France, in my area, there is another problem, that the traceability, and I know John touched on this yesterday, I think the traceability of old vines, perhaps in a cooperative area, is just a disaster. It is, to find out how old your vine is very, very difficult, unless you have a family member who can remember who planted it and what date, precisely what year. I know at the Cave, when I worked at the Co-op Montage, they had real difficulties finding out the exact age of the old vines, and so they just put down that it was 1905. So officially, there are a whole lot of vineyards down here that were planted in 1905, but we don't really know if they were or they weren't. So there are fundamental problems in making the wording vieille vigne credible within the industry, and then for consumers, because consumers are used to seeing vieille vigne. They perhaps recognize it as a sign of quality, but I don't think they know why. And I'm not sure that those vines are really old vines in all of the cases that it says vieille vigne, because we don't know what vieille vigne is as well. So I think there's basically a lot of work to do in France.
Well, thank you for being part of the work. We do have a question.
I have, Sarah, an anecdote on that point. You know, our prephylloxeric vineyard, which is recognized historical monument, it is really declared as planted in the year 1961. Yeah. Because before they didn't want to tell that they had a vineyard, because it was only to drink for the house. Yeah, they didn't want to sell wine, so they didn't want to tell the administration they had vineyard not to pay the taxes of having a vineyard. Yeah. So they didn't tell, and during 1 century that plot was settled there, and nobody knew it because they didn't want to pay the tax. Yeah. So it was declared as a vineyard planted in the year 1961. And we don't know the exact date, but it is 1830, around 1830. Can you imagine? And in our region, it was really classical, yeah. Mm-hmm.
Yes, and actually that's a very important point, because the South Africans stressed that one of the reasons they were able to put together such a coherent and cohesive offer and self-certification is because of the incredible records that were kept by the monopoly. And this is why the Old Vine Registry, which is managed by Elder Yarrow, which we help to promote, that's really like a seed moving forward of saying it's important to know. Just you value what you name, you value what you record. So there is, of course, a lot to be done, but I think that you've both shown how at different scales, just having that conviction and that leadership can actually start to make a big difference in your sphere. I do have a question from Andrew Matthews. Question for Domaine Jones. Assuming your vines are all grafted, that may are they all on the same rootstock, or are there variations?
Can I say I don't know? So they are 100% grafted. Yeah. They're grafted from heritage shoots, so they would have been shoots taken from local vineyards and then grafted onto an American rootstock, because it would have been around phylloxera time, and that's why they were regrafted. But the whole movement is actually showing me that I've got a lot more work to do in my vineyards as well, to get back to the root of the problem, if I can say that. But so I hope yeah, I'm working on it to actually try and identify more in depth my vineyards and what they're planted with and exactly how and even when.
Yes. The second part of Andrew's question then may not be something that you can answer. Is there evidence that some rootstocks perform better in drought conditions than others? We don't know.
Olivier's nodding, so perhaps Olivier.
The diversity is always important, and the ability of grapes to adapt to different conditions. We see that Grenache Gris is maybe better in your conditions than in mine, and I'm pretty sure that the Petit Montseng is much better there than in your region, and it's the same for the rootstock. A lot of the convictions of the last decades worked to have rootstock really, I would say, we used to tell qualitative, but in reality expressing, limiting the development of the grape. And maybe in the future we have to find and to keep working on different rootstocks, maybe more adapted to the new conditions we are seeing. Again, you have two roads: adaptation and the rootstock, the variety, the grape itself is part of this adaptation. Or technology, you keep what you have always, and you never evaluate with the new conditions. You are fighting against your time, and you have to use technology, or I don't know what, to avoid the problems you have. So adaptation, maybe you have in the selections of Katie, the answers again, that in new rootstocks, more adapted to dry conditions, that will be the future of the region. And I'm pretty sure that Katie is working for the future of the region, and the people who are working on that point. It is the only way to think that, to think. To find the good solutions.
Brilliant. I'll finish there because that's a fantastic message to end with. Thank you both so much, not just for your time today, but also for your work and your leadership. If you don't know the wines of Domaine Jones and Plaimont, please seek them out. They're wonderful wines. And thank you again. And it's